Have you ever noticed how a stupid person often walks with more certainty than the wise? They speak with confidence, interrupt others, and throw opinions like darts. But when you really listen, there's nothing solid underneath. No logic, no self-awareness, just noise wrapped in arrogance. But what if I told you that's not confidence? It's blindness dressed as certainty. It's like a thread pulling itself loose from the sweater it belongs to. It keeps going, thinking it's proving something, until the whole thing falls apart. And even then, it blames the sweater. That's what a stupid person does. They destroy their own support, call it strength, and never realize they're the ones left standing in the cold. Because while they're busy pretending to be wise, you have a choice. Call it out or quietly rise above it. And when you choose clarity over noise, that's when their illusion starts to crack. So how do you spot someone who only looks intelligent from a distance but folds under the weight of truth? Stay with me, because the 8 signs you're about to see will shift the way you view foolishness forever. Let's begin. Number 1. They never question themselves. Let's talk about one of the most common yet dangerously overlooked traits of a truly unwise person. They never question themselves. These are the people who walk through life convinced they're always right. They cling to their opinions like gospel, speak with certainty even when they lack knowledge, and shut down any idea that challenges their worldview. To them, disagreement isn't a chance to learn, it's a threat. Here's the truth. Refusing to question yourself doesn't make you confident. It makes you blind. Real wisdom doesn't come from knowing everything. It comes from knowing that you don't. And growth doesn't happen in certainty. It happens in humility. People like this don't listen to feedback. They don't reflect. They don't evolve. They'll make the same mistake 10 times and call it consistency. They believe being loud equals being right. But underneath it all, it's not strength. It's ego. And ego is the enemy of growth. This is where Stoic wisdom humbles us. Socrates, the great mind who laid the foundation for all philosophy, once said, "An unexamined life is not worth living." What he meant was simple. If you never question your thoughts, your choices, or your direction, you're not really living. You're just existing on autopilot. Reflection is not a weakness, it's a responsibility. If you're not looking inward, you're not growing outward. Let me share a story. A man I know, let's call him Rick, was a manager at a small company. He had experience, yes, but he believed that experience made him untouchable. When a younger team member offered a new idea, Rick shot it down immediately. "I've been doing this for 20 years, he said. "I know what works." But the truth was, he wasn't listening, and over time, that stubbornness cost him. The company started falling behind, innovation stalled, and the younger team members stopped offering input altogether. Rick didn't lose because he lacked knowledge. He lost because he stopped questioning whether his way was still the best way. So how do you spot this kind of person? They interrupt but never ask questions. They argue but never examine their logic. And most of all, they never apologize, because in their mind, they're never wrong. At the end of the day, a mind that refuses to reflect becomes a prison of its own ego. And anyone too proud to question themselves will always be too foolish to grow. Number 2, they speak without thinking. Let's talk about one of the most reckless signs of a foolish mind. They speak without thinking. These are the people who say the first thing that pops into their head. No filter, no pause, no consideration for how their words land. They confuse impulsiveness with honesty and assume that just because something is true, it needs to be said. But here's the truth. Thoughtless words don't reflect confidence. They reflect carelessness. A person who speaks without thinking doesn't just create noise. They create damage. They stir conflict where silence would have kept the peace. They give advice without understanding, criticize without context, and often speak louder than they actually know. And once the damage is done, they blame others for being too sensitive, instead of taking responsibility for their lack of restraint. Here's the reality. Speaking is easy. Thinking is harder. And in a world full of noise, wisdom lives in the pause. This is where Stoic philosophy brings clarity. Zeno of Citium, founder of Stoicism, once said, "Better to trip with the feet than with the tongue." Why? Because a stumble can bruise the body, but careless words can damage trust, relationships, and reputations. A wise person doesn't just know when to speak, they know when to stay silent. Let me share a story. A guy I know, let's call him Kyle, worked in a fast-paced office. He had good skills, but his mouth was faster than his mind. During a team meeting, someone suggested an idea he disagreed with. Instead of offering a calm counterpoint, Kyle blurted out, "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard." The room went quiet. The teammate shut down. And while Kyle thought he was just being direct, what he really did was kill collaboration. Over time, people stopped sharing ideas in front of him, not because they were wrong, but because he made them feel small. Kyle didn't lose respect because of a bad opinion. He lost it because of how he delivered it. So how do you recognize someone who speaks without thinking? They interrupt often, they talk more than they listen, and their words create more tension than clarity. They respond from ego, not understanding. At the end of the day, true intelligence isn't in how much you speak. It's in knowing when not to. And the loudest voice in the room is often the one that thought the least. Number 3. They blame everyone but themselves. Let's talk about one of the most obvious yet damaging signs of a foolish mind. They blame everyone but themselves. These are the people who point fingers the moment things fall apart. A missed deadline? Someone else didn't do their part. A broken relationship? The other person was always the problem. A failure in life? The system, the timing, the world, everything but them. Here's the truth. The refusal to take responsibility isn't strength. It's fear disguised as pride. Admitting fault requires self-awareness. It requires the courage to look in the mirror and say, "Maybe I was wrong." And for a foolish person, that's terrifying. So instead, they create stories. Stories that protect their ego but cost them their growth. This is where Stoic wisdom shines through. Epictetus once said, "The wise man seeks to correct himself. The fool blames others." Because the moment you shift blame outward, you give away your power. You choose pride over progress, and in doing so, you lock yourself into the very patterns that keep you stuck. Let me share a story. A man I know, let's call him Brandon, had big dreams. He started multiple projects, but none of them worked. And every time one failed, he had a reason. The team didn't support me. The market wasn't ready. People just don't get visionaries like me. Never once did he stop to ask, what could I have done differently? Over time, opportunities stopped coming. People stopped trusting him, not because he failed, but because he refused to own any part of it. Blaming others might protect your pride in the moment, but it destroys your reputation over time. People see through it. They notice the patterns, and eventually, they stop giving you chances, not because of what happened, but because of how you handled it. So how do you recognize someone who never takes responsibility? They play the victim in every story, exaggerate what others did, and downplay their own role. And they never learn because they believe they have nothing to learn. At the end of the day, growth begins where blame ends. The moment you stop looking out the window and start looking in the mirror, that's when wisdom begins. And until someone is willing to hold themselves accountable, they'll keep making the same mistakes and blaming someone else for them every time. If you found this valuable, hit like and subscribe for more powerful insights. Number 4. They react emotionally to everything. Let's talk about one of the most common signs of a foolish person. They react emotionally to everything. They're not guided by reason, reflection, or calm thought. Instead, their actions are fueled by anger, jealousy, fear, or ego. And when emotions take the driver's seat, logic gets thrown out of the window. Here's the truth. Reacting emotionally doesn't make someone passionate. It makes them unstable. Whether it's snapping in a conversation, getting defensive over small things, or lashing out at criticism, their inability to regulate their emotions turns every situation into unnecessary conflict. And often, they end up making things worse, not better. This isn't about suppressing feelings. Stoics didn't teach emotional numbness. They taught emotional control. Marcus Aurelius said it best. He who masters himself is mightier than he who conquers a city. Why? Because true strength isn't about dominating others. It's about not letting your own mind dominate you. A person who reacts emotionally gives away their power. Someone else's words or behavior can instantly throw them into rage or panic. They don't pause, they don't think, they just react. And then they try to fix the damage with excuses like, "I was just mad," or "that's just how I am." But being emotionally impulsive isn't a personality trait. It's a weakness. Let me share a story. A woman I know, let's call her Michelle, had a coworker who was talented but impossible to work with. The moment things didn't go his way, he'd snap. He'd yell during meetings, storm out of conversations, and send long emotional emails after minor disagreements. At first, people tried to be patient, but eventually, his outbursts started to drown out his talent. He lost trust, then support, and finally his position. Not because he lacked skill, but because he lacked control. So how do you recognize someone like this? They overreact to criticism. They misread neutral situations as threats. And most importantly, they let fleeting emotions dictate permanent decisions. Their inner world is chaotic, and that chaos spreads to everyone around them. At the end of the day, wisdom lives in the pause. The ability to breathe, reflect, and respond, not just react, is what separates the foolish from the grounded. Because the strongest person in the room isn't the loudest. It's the one who stays calm when everyone else loses control. Number 5. They mock what they don't understand. Let's talk about one of the most closed-minded traits of a foolish person. They mock what they don't understand. When an idea challenges their limited worldview, they don't ask questions or try to learn. They ridicule it, laugh at it, and dismiss it without ever trying to grasp it. Not because it's wrong, but because it's unfamiliar. Here's the truth. Mockery is the mask of insecurity. When someone instantly rejects something new or different, it's often because they feel threatened by it. Learning requires humility, and humility requires admitting that you might not know everything, but the foolish person doesn't want to be a student. They want to feel superior. So instead of growing, they scoff. Instead of asking, they judge. And that's where true ignorance lives, not in not knowing, but in refusing to learn. This is why Stoic thinkers held deep respect for open-mindedness. Aristotle, admired even by the Stoics, once said, It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. That's the key. You don't have to agree with every idea, but you should at least be willing to understand it. Wisdom listens. Foolishness laughs. Let me share a story. A guy I know, let's call him Trevor, used to mock anyone who talked about mindfulness or emotional intelligence. That's all just soft talk, he'd say. Real people tough it out. He never read about it, never explored the science, never asked how it might help. But deep down, his life was chaotic. His relationships were falling apart. His stress was through the roof, and he was stuck in a cycle of emotional outbursts. Still, he mocked what he didn't understand, because admitting there might be something valuable in those ideas would have meant facing his own gaps. So how do you spot someone like this? They laugh at new concepts, call deep thinkers too serious, and act like curiosity is weakness. But in reality, they're hiding behind sarcasm to avoid the discomfort of learning something new. At the end of the day, a closed mind is a silent prison, and the moment someone starts mocking what they don't even understand, that's not intellect, it's ego. Because the wise are curious, and the foolish are loud. If you've watched the video this far, don't forget to leave a comment with a thank you and give it a like if you enjoyed the content. Your support means a lot and motivates me to keep creating more interesting videos. I hope you find inspiration in them and that we continue learning together. Thank you for your support. Number 6. They repeat the same mistakes. Let's talk about one of the most frustrating traits of a foolish person. They repeat the same mistakes again and again, not because life is unfair, not because others hold them back, but because they refuse to learn. They don't reflect. They don't ask why things keep going wrong. They just stumble forward, blaming circumstances while walking straight into the same failure they've keep you stuck. Here's the truth. Everyone makes mistakes. The wise admit them, examine them, and grow from them. The foolish ignore them, excuse them, and repeat them. It's not the failure that defines ignorance. It's the refusal to learn from it. People like this often say things like, "That's just how I am," or "It always turns out this way for me," as if their patterns are just fate. But the truth is, they're stuck, not because they lack opportunity, but because they lack awareness. Without reflection, there is no growth, only repetition. This is where Stoic wisdom delivers its sharpest lesson. Seneca once said, "The unwise trip over the same stone twice." And that's exactly what happens when someone lives without awareness. They walk the same road, hit the same wall, suffer the same result, and learn nothing. Let me share a story. A guy I know, let's call him Derek, had a habit of jumping into relationships too fast. Every time things went wrong, he blamed the other person. They were too clingy, they didn't understand me, they changed. But the pattern was always the same. He rushed in, ignored red flags, avoided communication, and when it fell apart, he never asked what part he played. Over the years, he kept finding himself in the same emotional mess, not because love failed him, but because he failed to look inward. So how do you spot someone like this? They always have a story, but never take responsibility. They call it bad luck instead of poor choices. And worst of all, they start to believe that nothing will ever change when, in truth, they just haven't changed their approach. At the end of the day, mistakes are life's greatest teachers, but only if you're willing to listen. A foolish person keeps walking in circles and calls it destiny. A wise one pauses, reflects, and walks a new path. Number 7. They believe winning an argument is more important than understanding. Let's talk about one of the most telling signs of a foolish person. They argue not to understand, but to win. For them, conversations are battlegrounds. Every disagreement becomes a personal attack. Every question is a challenge to their authority. They don't listen to learn. They listen to respond. Not because they care about truth, but because their ego demands victory. Here's the truth. Arguing just to be right is a subtle form of insecurity. When someone values being right more than being wise, they close themselves off from reason, growth, and connection. They interrupt. They twist words. They raise their voice, not to add value, but to overpower. And worst of all, they treat every differing opinion as a threat instead of an opportunity. This is where Stoic philosophy brings the sharpest insight. Epictetus once said, "If you wish to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." What he meant was simple. Real growth begins when you stop needing to prove yourself all the time. A wise person is okay with not having the last word. They're okay with being misunderstood if it means learning something deeper. But the foolish? Their pride won't allow it. Let me share a story. A man I know, let's call him Anthony, was incredibly intelligent but exhausting to talk to. No matter the topic, he had to be right. If someone shared an opinion, he'd immediately jump in to correct them. Even in casual conversations, he'd turn everything into a debate. And when someone challenged him, he'd double down, not with facts, but with volume. Over time, people stopped engaging, not because they couldn't handle disagreement, but because they knew it wasn't a discussion. It was a performance. Anthony didn't care about ideas, he cared about dominance. So how do you spot someone like this? They can't handle disagreement without getting defensive. They interrupt before you finish. They value being right more than being kind. And the moment you challenge their opinion, the walls go up. At the end of the day, arguing to win is a battle of ego, not intellect. The wise seek clarity. The foolish seek control. And the louder someone argues, the more they reveal their fear of being wrong. True strength isn't found in having the last word. It's found in knowing when to listen. Because the goal of conversation isn't victory, it's understanding. Number 8, they pretend to know everything. Let's talk about one of the loudest signs of a foolish mind. They pretend to know everything. These are the people who speak with absolute certainty on topics they barely understand. They talk more than they listen, interrupt more than they ask, and offer opinions as if they were undeniable facts. They don't seek truth, they seek attention. And behind all that fake confidence, insecurity is quietly hiding. Here's the truth. Pretending to know everything is not strength. It's fear of looking weak. A wise person doesn't feel the need to prove themselves in every room. They're comfortable saying, "I don't know." But a fool sees every conversation as a stage, and so they perform, loudly, constantly, and blindly. They offer advice they've never lived, speak over people with actual experience, and when challenged, they get defensive because their identity is built not on knowledge, but on the illusion of it. This is where ancient wisdom cuts through the noise. Socrates, widely admired by the Stoics, once said, "The wise man knows he knows nothing. The fool thinks he knows it all." Real intelligence isn't loud. It's humble. It's curious. It knows that the more you learn, the more you realize how much you still don't know. Let me share a story. A guy I know, let's call him Chris, was always the loudest person in the room. No matter the topic, he had something to say. Business, politics, science, anything, even things he clearly hadn't read about. He'd talk like an expert. People around him would nod politely at first, but over time, they stopped taking him seriously, not because he didn't have value, but because he never listened. He didn't ask questions. He didn't leave space for other voices, and eventually, his need to know everything became the very reason no one believed he knew anything at all. So how do you recognize someone like this? They never ask for help. They speak over others. They can't say, "I don't know," without turning it into a joke or an excuse. And their goal isn't growth, it's control. If you believe this video can help others, give it a like. It helps the YouTube algorithm show it to more people. And don't forget to subscribe for more awesome content coming your way. Share your thoughts in the comments. I will definitely reply.